What do a lizard man, a ham sandwich, a redneck wizard, and a druidic game warden have to do with each other? Our expert today exemplifies that independent authors have all the limitless creativity and access they could ever need to find an audience that loves their work. Welcome to the Just Dumb Enough podcast, a show that acknowledges no one is always an expert by dispelling misconceptions with real experts. I'm your host as always, Colton Petrie. My guest today is Bob McGough. Bob is an indie author and game designer who isn't afraid to tell the truth about what happens once you publish a book, no matter the outlet. He values transparency in a field that intentionally tries to obfuscate what good sales are, and breaks down the real milestones that make writing such a valuable tool for so many creative people. Let's publish our own stories, and be proud that we finished. Welcome to the show, Bob McGough.
Hey there. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I am so excited to have you on the show. Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit for people who are listening?
Sure. As we said, I'm Bob McGough. I am a author, podcaster, and indie RPG game designer from South Alabama. Very, very rural South Alabama. And by my day job is a technical writer in state government. And then at night, I get to write fun stuff, all sorts of fun stuff. And it's been quite a journey.
Yeah. Where'd this journey start? I mean, have you always been kind of a writer?
Yeah, I have. The output has taken a number of different forms. I actually started when I actually have it still. When I was like 5 or 6 years old, I wrote a book. It is like a page and a half of words in my terrible handwriting with a couple of pictures, but it was about a lizard man kind of creature that attacked people with a ham sandwich. I don't know why. And so, I kind of kept piddling away like that. In high school, I didn't know what flash fiction was, but I wrote a bunch of flash fiction. And I tried that was my first attempt at writing a real novel. I've always been a big fan of Warhammer tabletop miniature game. And I basically I was trying to write a fan fiction novel about dwarves, because why not? And that went poorly. And then I got to college and I discovered role-playing games. And I did a ton of writing in that space, but no books. And I had an interesting conversation with someone actually in the past like 3 or 4 months that caused me to realize that basically for the better part of a decade, I did no quote unquote real writing because D&D had become my creative outlet. I was able to tell stories through that medium and really enjoyed it. And then 2012, I started as tail end of grad school. I did my first NaNoWriMo, which is, for those who don't know, is National Novel Writing Month. It's where you write 50,000 words over the course of a month. If you don't know how many words 50,000 words is, it's a lot. And so I did that, wrote a collection of short stories for it. And that's when I realized, you know what? I kind of rediscovered my love. This is what I really want to be doing. And I've been plugging away pretty seriously at it ever since.
Yeah, I think I also did NaNoWriMo in 2012, but it is very challenging because you're like, oh, if I wrote 1,000 words a day, I'd be killing it. And it's like, you still wouldn't pass.
Yeah. And I think honestly, I have an author friend that I'm really good friends with. His name is Ben Meeks. And I've just always been impressed. He can do, I believe he can do anything. And I commented on that, and he was like, well, really, my secret is I'm just too dumb to know I can't do these things. So I go do these things. And I think that was my approach to NaNoWriMo. I had no real concept of how difficult it was going to be, but I respond really well to like stat tracking. And so that was intensely motivating for me. So I've completed NaNoWriMo, I think 7 times now. but I've quit. I did it like 6 years in a row, took a couple years off, came back and did it one more time, and I haven't done it since because what I realized is however much extra I write in November, December and January I write that much less. So it ends up being kind of a net neutral, and so I'd rather just do without the stress.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a great one if it's like you don't write at all during the year, but 1 month motivates you to start writing. Like that's great. But then, it's those people that are like always writing that
Yeah.
extra grind really does wear you down.
It does. And what I tell people, I do a fair bit of mentoring in the author space and I teach some workshops and things like that. And I do tell people that writing is a muscle. And, like weightlifters, they're always trying to lift more weights because you're trying to like kind of tear that muscle so it heals back stronger. And I kind of view NaNoWriMo like that. If you can do NaNoWriMo, you can do whatever kind of writing you want to do. If you can complete that, and everything else just seems that much easier. If you can write 50,000 words in a month, then the rest of the year or for the rest of your career, when you're like if I write 1,000 words a week, I have a novel at the end of the year. When you wrote 1,600 words a day for a month, 1,000 words a week is easy. So it really can, I think, prepare people for a long-term career in writing.
Well, and a lot of people I think really want to get into writing. And there's just like, I don't know that there's a lot of good guides out there that say this is how you start.
Yeah. Well, and it's because, like anything creative, there's no one way, and everyone works differently. So it's kind of hard to come up with some universals. To use me as an example, broadly speaking, when it comes to writing, folks tend to be either what they call plotters or pantsers. And what that means is a plotter is someone who kind of heavily plots out what the book is going to have in it before they sit down to write the book. And pantsers, they just kind of like have a general idea and then they just sit down and write the book, and just kind of let the story take them where it's going to go. And what you find is very, 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 very few people are 100% one or the other. Most people are a mix. And so the very first novel I tried to write, I really did just go all pantser and I failed miserably. And then my next one I was like, oh, well, I didn't do enough planning. That was my problem. And I went like 100% the other way and just plotted it out. And that killed my like yes, I had a book plotted, but when I sat down to write it, it killed my creativity. I felt constrained. So through experimentation, what I've learned for me is I'm like 10% plotter, 90% pantser. For a full length novel, I'll typically come up with roughly a sentence per chapter outline. And then that ends up being, by the time I'm done writing it, if I do like 20 sentences for 20 chapters, there ends up being normally about 35 chapters because I discovered chapters along the way. But I have that framework, so I have the general idea of where the book is going. But that's what works for me. It's not going to necessarily work for anyone else. So, and that's why getting started with writing, it is hard to find a universal guide other than just write, which is not terribly helpful.
Well, and I think it's one of those that, like, I think I fell into this trap. I didn't know there was two types of people, and that makes perfect sense now because I am one of those that, like, basically, I'm a pantser. Like, I just write, as it comes to me with a general thought, like where it's going to end. And as I started getting into writing something just a little bit ago, I was like, well, how about I have this plot point and this one and this one? And I just kept expanding. And then I was like, man, I have to hit all of these plot points and I have no motivation left.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's part of it. For some pantsers, that they don't realize it, but that's your subconscious hack to not being intimidated by the length of the work. Like if they were to sit down and think, man, I'm going to have to write all these things to have a book, a lot of them it would freak them out. So a lot of pantsers, it doesn't seem that way because you're uncovering the book as you go, and it seems less intimidating. Um, and I don't think most people or any people really think about it in those terms, but I do know that for some people that very much is a factor. What I tell people is the kind of the more what little universal advice I can give to folks that are starting is complete something. Just finish something. Just one thing. Just finish one thing so you can prove to yourself that you can finish it. It doesn't have to be a novel, you know? Give yourself a victory. Write a short story. Once you've written that short story, okay, I've finished something. I've taken a blank page and I've turned it into a final draft, you know? If you can do that, then you've proven yourself that you can finish. Now it's just adding word count. Maybe, you don't have to go right into writing 150,000 word doorstopper epic fantasy novel that's the first in a trilogy. You can write a couple short stories, send them out to submit them to anthologies, start working on a novella, and work your way up to a novel. Just give yourself some achievable goals to kind of get your confidence up, and then celebrate those. Like, yeah, your friends and family are probably not going to really care that you completed a short story. I have some really amazing friends, and I would say 90% of my friends have never read a book I've written. That does not make them bad friends. I write stuff that they don't like to read. They don't read fantasy. I write fantasy. Why are they going to suddenly switch genres just for me? They're amazing and supportive friends in other ways. But there are online communities that will absolutely help you celebrate your wins. And so that would be my kind of challenge to folks that are getting started is just finish something and then celebrate it, be it on a subreddit, a writing subreddit, or a Facebook group about urban fantasy. Just whatever you're doing, just get in there and celebrate that win to give yourself a little confidence boost and to show that you are part of a community of writers.
Well, it certainly seems like there's a lot of hurdles people have to jump over where they're like, number one, I have to be comfortable with other people reading this. Some people love to write and they're like, I'll never show another living soul what I have done today.
Yeah. And you really, I guess the first question you have to ask yourself is what's your goal with writing? If you just like to write, you have no intention of publishing, then yeah, just do whatever makes you most happy, if you are looking to publish, either be published or self-publish or some mix of the two, like I do, then you're going to have to get comfortable with people reading your stuff. That's just I know me, I always struggle with imposter syndrome. Every author I know struggles with imposter syndrome. So there is always a level of awkwardness there. Every so often, I just get a review that when I'm done reading, it's like, did they read my book? Like, no, no, like, there's no way. And so there's always going to be a little bit of awkwardness there. There's always going to be a little, at least in my case, it's just like I can't believe that folks are reading my books and actually love it. Strangers on the internet are sharing my books around. Like, in what world are we living in? So, and it takes some getting used to, but you're just going to have to do it to some degree if you want to publish in
Yeah.
any shape, form, or fashion.
Well, and I think that goes for anything in any creative fashion. If you're working on a novel, like people buying and talking about the novel in reviews is going to be shocking. The same thing, like if you and you're designing a game and people are like, this is one of the best games I've ever played. You're like, which game did you play?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I don't feel that way about my own work.
Yeah, spoiler. People are not saying my games are the best games they've ever played. Maybe weirdest, maybe silliest, but not best. But yeah, for me, I had by the time my I published my first book, I'd written a few books, and they was just kind of sitting in the chest at that point. And the thing I really struggled with is I at that point I did not have any author friends. I had writer friends. I had a writing group that I organized, and there was a bunch of us in it, and we were all writing, but none of us were publishing. So when I finally put out my first book, the thing I struggled with was I didn't know if I was actually any good. And if my mom reads it, of course she's going to love it. She's my mom. And so I really struggle with that. And because of that, I did a very bad job marketing my book because I didn't have confidence in it. If I'm not confident in it, I struggle with self-promotion. So it wasn't until I actually had reviews coming in, like positive reviews, and from strangers on the internet, then I was like, oh, okay. I might not be Stephen King, but I'm not just racking up 1-star reviews here. So clearly there's a decent number of people who actually like the way I write, and that gave me the confidence to be able to actually start marketing. And at that point, it's been onwards and upwards ever since. Slowly, but gradually.
Well, and I think that's a big one people kind of think about when they're like, okay, I have the confidence for other people to read it. I've actually finished it and I want it out there. They start looking at, publishing and marketing are like two huge steps to get your book in front of people. And I think, you get a little bit lost because you're like, well, how do I market a book? I'm not a millionaire, so I can't just have an ad fund running,
Yeah.
somewhere in the background.
The quickest way to make $1 million writing a book is start with $2 million. Uh, at this point in my career, I spend more time doing stuff on the back end than actually writing. And a lot of that is marketing. I mostly do organic marketing. I don't do any paid ads, but it's designing covers, it's doing edits, it's doing layouts, it's ordering new books. It's, there, gosh, the list is never ending. I don't have it beside me, but I have, a weekly planner that I just fill every week with just stuff that's got to get done. And that's the thing that I think most authors or potential authors don't realize is writing the book is honestly the easy part. As nightmarish as that sounds, because that's the thing that you set out to do. You wanted to do that. Everything else is just to further that dream, and a lot of it's not fun. So, ugh. I would also say, kind of about getting that confidence. One bit of advice is, like I said, I do a lot of mentoring, and most of the mentoring I do is free, but occasionally I get hired to do critiques, like typically it's like of someone's first 10 pages of their book, and I do it for like Writer's Digest and stuff like that. And what I've come to realize is most of the people that are paying for this, what they want to know is, am I wasting my time? Am I actually a decent writer? Should I even keep going with this? And so that's what I end up talking to people about the most with the critiques is telling, yes, I have to go in there and tell them like, oh, hey, you wrote this third person. This genre is traditionally in first person. If you're trying to get trad published, you're going to have a hard time. Stuff like that. But 9 times out of 10, and luckily, most folks I've been able to tell them it's like, you're not wasting your time. Like, yes, you have some work to do, but you're not wasting your time. So I would say that for folks out there that you're just kind of wondering, you can look for things like that. For me, I like having that paid relationship with someone. Like I hire an editor. I have connections. I could get the books edited for free, but it would be from like my stepmom taught college English. She absolutely could edit my books. But I like having a paid relationship where we have distance, paid relationship with a stranger essentially, that they are not in my daily life. They have no biases around that. And they'll give it to me straight, and especially because I paid them to do so. And so in cases like that, if you can find a service where it's like a quick critique for, or like maybe your first 10 pages, and just tell them that like, yeah, you do want the general critique of like, hey, yeah, how's my flow, stuff like that. But really you just want to know, just be upfront. Like you just want to know, am I wasting my time? And odds are you aren't. Writing is a craft that every author I know started out pretty terrible. And we just all got better because we just kept at it. So just keep at it, you'll get better.
One, I have to assume some of those is like if you're paying a very technical person to go over a very technical book, they're like, your use of semicolons is atrocious. And you're like,
Oh,
thanks, I don't know what to do with that information.
my my editor informs me that I have never met a comma that I couldn't misplace. I just And I know why. I know why it is. Commas go in natural pauses, and in my head, I put I put natural pauses in places that conventional people don't. Um, so they're in the right spot in my head. It's just for anyone else. She's like, "What are you even doing with these commas?" So yeah, can't really fix that. That's why I have an editor.
I think I do the same thing because every once in a while I'll read something that's like very clearly didn't have an editor to it. You know, it's like
Yeah.
it's a post of some sort, and I'll be reading it and I'll go comma, like out loud. I will say like comma right there, and then, and then I'll just keep reading, and I'm like, I could be wrong. That might not be
Yeah.
where commas go at all, but in my brain, that's where the comma goes.
Yeah, yeah. And the folks who came up with the rules for commas, who even were they? Who said they were the be all end all authority on commas? Maybe secretly I'm the authority on commas and just everyone else is using them wrong.
The Illuminati of commas.
Yeah, yeah. Probably not. But hey, it all works out in the end.
Yeah, of course. So when you finally do, you get through all these steps, you've done all the marketing, you're working on all this back end stuff. What kind of separates like good sales from great sales?
I have good sales. You would be surprised. I think most people would be surprised at how few books you have to sell to be in the top 10-20% of authors out there. I am actually like super huge on transparency. When I started out, like I said, I had no author friends. I had no point of reference. So when I put my first book out, I had no idea if the sales were good, the sales were bad, the sales were terrible. In retrospect, sales were bad, but not terrible. And and I had nothing to compare it to. I had no one I could talk to. I couldn't find online where people were talking about the nitty gritty. So I was like, you know what? I will be the change I want to see. So now, and I've done this for years now, every month you can go to my website and there will be a blog post for that month that details exactly how many books I sold that month, how much I made selling RPGs, how my Instagram account grew or shrunk, all these things and what I tried. And I do a similar thing for every event I do, like every convention I go to and sell at. I recap it, talk about how sales went, what worked, what didn't. And then with book launches, the same thing. Every time I launch a book, I do a recap post of my launch week to show here's how sales were. And I think right now I'd have to look. I just did a blog post about it back in June, but I've sold, I think it's over 4,000 books, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you consider that the majority of books only sell 200 copies, all of my books have sold at least 200 copies. So yeah, and like even going to doing an event, if I go do an in-person event and I sell 20 to 25 books in a single day, that's a really good event. It doesn't take a lot to really be a fairly highly profitable event. But, this was not, I did not put a book out and was going and having, events where I made 700-800 bucks. I built to that over time. I have covered all my expenses. I've been covering all my expenses for years. Everything I'm profitable and I am doing better than the majority of authors out there, but I am so far from being a success, it's not even funny. I'm not close to being able to do this full time. Last year, I made just over $10,000 doing this. This year, I'm on track to beat that a little bit. We'll see how it goes. Dragon Con is coming up. That's going to be my big weekend. Hopefully, if that goes really well, I could beat last year by a lot. I don't know. We'll see. So yeah,
Yeah.
good sales, great sales. Stephen King has mind-blowing sales. Most anyone that you see in Books a Million probably has good sales. And then me, I have pretty decent sales for mostly indie author who doesn't do like rapid release 20 books 50K style book publishing.
Well, because I was thinking about it, I'm like, I have no frame of reference for the numbers. Much like you said, you were looking for them and couldn't find them. And I'm like, if I put a book out and it sold a book a week for 2 years, I'm like, that's only 100 books, but I'd be pretty proud of myself for like 100 books. And you're like, most books are in that 200 range. I'm like, man, I'm aiming low.
Yeah, well, and when I say like we're talking traditionally published books a lot of the times there. It's not we're not talking just self-pub. A lot of folks think that, oh, if I could just get traditionally published, it's off to the races then. And I'm a mix. Most of my books are self-published. My initial brush with publishing was a small press published some works of mine and went poorly. But coming out in this upcoming year, a press called Falstaff Books is going to be publishing a horror novel of mine. So I'm kind of coming full circle. Started trad, went full indie, self-pub. Now I'm dipping my toes back into trad publishing, but I will stay primarily self-publishing for the foreseeable future. Unless HarperCollins, just they decide to come calling, then we might talk. But traditional publishing is basically gambling. It's basically organized gambling. They put out, say 5,000 books in a year, and they will spend no marketing dollars on any of them. One of them will start to sell better than the rest, and they will put a little bit of money behind it, marketing. If it continues to grow, they'll put more money behind it, marketing. But the whole time, they're expecting you to carry the bulk of your marketing. At this point, to get trad published, you have to have an agent, and agents are mostly only accepting people with fairly established social media presence because they know that, a traditional publisher is not going to be interested in you if you don't have a pretty decent social media presence, which is painful for the majority of authors because we want to write books. We don't want to run social media accounts.
Yeah. I was going to say, most people are not going to follow, like, oh, I love this person's last 9 books in the series. Let me go see what their tweet says.
Right. And some do. But yeah, the majority of people, they don't engage with authors on social media. Stephen King's probably got like millions of social media followers, but when you look at how many, probably hundreds of millions of people have read his books, it's a sliver. One interesting thing, they had a like an antitrust court case that happened, and they did a bunch of depositions with some of the executives at these big publishing houses, and they were talking about Colleen Hoover, she primarily writes romance. And they were asking, like, well, how much money do y'all? And she sells millions of books, right? She's one of the biggest authors right now. And they're like, well, how much money do y'all spend a year on her on marketing? And they said $62,000 this year, which is a drop in the bucket for what she's earned. And they said, why do you spend so little on her? She's like, oh, because she's really good at TikTok. So we just kind of let her do it. And it's like, then what does she need you for? Like, what are you doing for her? I mean, you're publishing the books, you're getting them in Barnes and Noble, I guess, but she could go independent and use Ingram Spark and do that herself. But, they do all her covers for her. They do all the editing, so she doesn't have to worry about that kind of stuff. So she's making money hand over fist. So, I'm
She's
I'm
not
I'm not all
super worried.
jealous. Yeah. Yeah, she probably will, dab her tears away with crisp $100 bills. You know, but I'm only intensely jealous.
Yeah, of course, as are we. And it's one of those, I saw somebody's breakdown where they're like, if you take out the amount that the publisher gets for publishing your book, plus your agent's fee, plus tax, plus something else, they're like, you're making 25 to 35 cents on a
Yeah.
sale. And they're like, that's crazy because they're selling your books at $8. They're like,
Yeah.
even if you're on the low end, like, you're not making anywhere near the amount of money people think you are.
Oh, no, absolutely not. I mean, at this point, a lot of folks who traditionally publish don't get an advance at all, or if they do, it's very, very tiny. But yeah, a large proportion of authors never earn back their advance. And even there was it's even a lot of the celebrity type ones, they were talking about, like, it was just fascinating seeing the inside mechanics of how these traditional publishers work. And they basically were upfront is they all operate on, they bank that about once a decade they're going to discover a J.K. Rowling with Harry Potter or a Twilight or something like that that's just so mega popular that it basically bankrolls the operation for the next decade. And everyone else just is kind of left fighting for the crumbs that are that are left. I think it was like J.K. Rowling basically paid for every book to get published by her press for, many years. And if no other book made any money, the press was still in good shape because she had generated so much. But I just think of how much she doesn't get per book, and she, at this point, she's probably negotiated some fairly decent terms. Most authors coming into it are not going to get terms like that at all. And even me, I'm only fighting Amazon for a cut. And ebook and sales through Amazon, I don't make a lot. Where I make my money is ordering the copy books at cost and selling them to people myself. That there I make, $10, $12 a book at that point.
Well, you'd think it would be the other way around. Is you're like, okay, basically I only have the cost of printing plus this, fee for whoever the marketplace is. But it's actually very much like you'd be better off just doing this yourself, other than the fact that fewer people will see it.
Yeah. Yeah. For the ebooks, and I if I was traditionally published, my ebooks would not be as cheap as they are, but that's just the nature of the beast. My print books on Amazon, they're priced comparable to traditionally published because that's, market expectation there. But yeah, Amazon has their cost. And then, like, so for example, one of my books, the print cost on it will be $4 and some change. And then if I have the book for 15, me and Amazon then split. We don't split 15, we split 10 and some change. And with ebooks, it can be even worse. I get 70% off an ebook because all my ebooks are priced in the band that they give me 70% of the money after delivery fees. But if my book was like 99 cents, I would only get 30% of the of the money. It's awful. And Audible, my first book's out on audiobook now. I did royalty share on that. I only get 25% of any audiobook that sells on Audible, which is not great.
Yeah, certainly not great. I mean, it's one of those we've all heard about, like, Amazon and their ranking systems. And is there like a general reason that we really understand where we're like, oh, it's reviews that drive this thing higher versus like if it had 10 jillion sales a day, it wouldn't matter if it had any reviews.
Yeah, it Amazon's algorithm is primarily triggered by sales. Reviews help, but reviews really only help once someone has arrived to it to kind of seal the deal on a sale. If someone clicks on a book and there are no reviews, they may not buy it. But if they click on it and they see, oh, it's got 200 reviews and its average is like 4.3, okay, they're much more likely to buy it at that point. But what drives it up the rankings is absolutely sales. The reviews. I've been told that once you get to 50 reviews, the algorithm starts to trigger more in your favor. I don't know how true that is, and Amazon obviously isn't telling. But what people absolutely attest to is the more you sell, the higher you'll be in the rankings. But unfortunately, the boost is very limited. So whenever I launch a book, I typically put my first book up for free for like my launch window. The ebook will be free for 5 days to kind of get people like, oh, okay, well, I just see that he announced book six. Let me click on, oh, that sounds intriguing. Oh, well, book one's free right now. And then I put the rest on sale. And so I get a pretty big bump up the rankings when that happens. But that only lasts for days if I'm lucky, hours if I'm not, because there's just so many books being bought on Amazon at any given time. So if you can get, to number one and, people keep buying it and it really starts to spread word of mouth or you do some really good ads, you can kind of keep that ranking on up there. But there's an element of luck. There's an element of typically you're spending money to make money at that point. And I have not experienced that yet, but it's not really my primary focus when it comes to selling. Again, no one is, most people are not zero sum on this, but broadly speaking, there are those who really focus more on the online side of sales. And then there are folks who tend to focus more on the in person side of sales. And I definitely fall on the in person side. I like making the connections with people. I like speaking on panels. I like being a guest at conventions, stuff like that. That to me is the most fun thing in the world. And it's also where, on a per book basis, it's where I make the most money. Now, yes, if I sold, a few million copies ebooks, I would make more money that way. But right now, I'm just focused on putting out the best book I can and making real connections with readers so that they kind of feel invested in me and they're like, oh, that guy, he's weird but likable. Uh, and hopefully I leave a good impression. They read the book and like, oh, okay, he was a nice guy. This is a good book. I will recommend this to my friends. So,
Yeah.
and it's working out.
Well, and that kind of brings up that question where you're talking about, going to conventions, and we've all seen them. If you've been to a convention, there's rows of people selling their books, and I'm like, I have no idea how successful or brand new these people are, but some of them are like, it looks very well put together. They must not be here for the first time. When do you like make the decision to jump onto a convention?
For me, I actually started doing conventions before I had novels. I've just always liked conventions. Dragon Con is my favorite weekend of the year every year. For those who don't know, it's like 70,000 nerds in like 8 city blocks of downtown Atlanta over Labor Day weekend. It's madness. It's amazing. And so I had been going to some conventions and I actually started early on. I had some short stories published in some anthologies and I was able to get author copies of those and I would sell those, but people don't really like buying anthologies from a guy who's like, "Oh, I have one story in here." Those don't fly off the shelf. But so I kind of dipped my toes in the water there. But early on, I was primarily just interested in trying to do panels. I just really liked being on panels. And so at this point, I actually, for those who are interested, you can go to my website. I actually have a guide that's like, "Hey, you're doing your first event. Here's like a checklist of stuff you need to be thinking about, what you do to prepare, things like that." And really, it's just a matter of just applying and asking. But I would say for folks who are interested in it, go to conventions, go talk to authors at these conventions. They will all be super helpful. They will all be super nice. It'll be guys like me who we have all been helped out along the way, and we're always looking to pay it forward. And so just ask. And the real power move is you make a friend with one of them and y'all share tables at events. The majority of events I do these days, I share a table with Ben Meeks. We share a hotel room. A lot of times it'll be 3 or 4 of us authors split in a hotel room. We're sharing tables. We're just trying to get the cost down as low as possible. And then we show up, we sling books, we go do panels. Hopefully people follow us back to our table from the panels. And we have, they're amazing times. I love it to death. But I would say that you need to have a book, at least one, before you start doing this. But moderate your expectations. It's much harder to make your money back if you only have one book because you can't really upsell. I didn't start making significant money at events till I had 3 books out because then I started offering, oh, well, here's a 3 book bundle. And then I made a omnibus edition. Oh, well, you can buy this omnibus, which you get a price break, and I make more. I actually make more money selling those. So it's much easier to make money at that point. So, but you can. I know authors who only have one book that do events and they make money. It just kind of depends on what type of book, the type of event, and just moderate your expectations until you get more books on the table.
Well, and there's, a unique kind of position in there where it's like people who write a lot of books all in different genres versus like somebody like yourself where you're like, well, I wrote a bunch of books in a series. So like I can bundle this series together and, the sales of the first book drive the second drives the third. like you get kind of a downstream effect of people, like you could watch people buying your books in sequence where you're
Yeah.
like, ah, I could see they just finished the fourth one because they just bought the fifth one.
Yeah, every so often I see that. Because like my online sales, I make money every day online through Amazon, but some days it's, a few pennies, but then like yesterday, I think I sold like 25 bucks, I think. And you'll see it because my sales are low enough at this point, I can see when like, oh, hey, I can see on Kindle Unlimited, boom, I know what it's called KENP, Kindle estimated number of pages or something like that. It's how Amazon measures page reads. It's like, oh, I can see this page read hit, 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 hit. I can see that someone just binged the series. That's always fun to see. It warms the heart. But yeah, and that's the cool. One cool thing is when you talk about like conventions, there's just a bunch of authors. That's typically what's known as an author's alley. Not every convention has them. Some they just put them in the vendor hall, but bigger conventions do typically have a author specific area, typically in a hallway, um, leading between places. And the cool thing is a lot of times those tables are free or very, very cheap. Most of the time it'll be like, the booth is $60, but if you will volunteer for at least 3 panels, your table is comped. And so I do that wherever I can because I just like doing panels anyway. But if it also can remove my table fee, yeah, please, let's go.
Yeah, you're like, I'm just getting paid to do things I like at this point.
Yeah, the dream. Like I said, if I could quit my job tomorrow and just do conventions every weekend, I would be so happy.
Well, and honestly, I mean, if you're somebody who has a fairly, entry level job and you looked at that like, okay, well, it's 60 bucks, but if I do 3 panels, it's free, that's $20 an hour. Like,
Yeah.
that's what they're paying you effectively. It's just a
Yeah,
trade instead of like cash in hand.
exactly. Oh, there is fortunately I have a good enough job now that it does not make sense for me to quit, especially because of health insurance. I'm getting older and fatter. Health insurance is a must. Um, But I can think back to times in my life where I did not make much more than $10,000 in a year. So if this was, 10 years ago, I might very well have just quit whatever job I had delivering pizza or working at a warehouse or whatever other terrible job I had, and really just gone all in on this. But, gotta got a mortgage, got a family to help keep fed and clothed, and need health insurance. So, but fingers crossed. The goal is hopefully within 7 years I will be making enough to replace that income, so then I can just quit and do this full time. So
The phase out plan.
yeah, and that's the thing. I couldn't handle the stress of it, but I think if I did quit my job, I could probably within 2 years. I feel pretty confident I could get to where I had replaced that income because I would just be all in focused on this. But those 2 years would stress me out to the point where I would just keel over with a heart attack because I could not deal with the stress of not having a steady income. So we're not doing that. It's not for me.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's definitely one of those that it's the dream, right? The dream is to go full time. And sometimes you're like, well, that dream's going to take a while. You're not just going to be, unless you are J.K. Rowling, you're not going to just like drop a book and then quit your job and walk away. Like, you're going to put a book out there, it'll do okay. You'll put a second one out there, they'll both do a little better. You'll do some conventions. Like, it's a very slow roll for most people.
Yeah. What I'm a big proponent for everyone should define success for themselves. And part of that is like, yeah, my dream of dreams is to do this full time. But I know enough now about publishing and just the reality of doing this that I know that it is somewhat unlikely that I'll be doing this full time, making significant money. So what I've done is I basically have two success for me. The big success would be full time, but the other success for me is just being able to travel more or less as much as I wanted. So getting to a point where my books are earning enough money that if me and the lady wife want to go to Ireland for our birthdays next year, then yeah, we can do that stress free because I have basically paid for our whole trip doing this. And so that to me is that's success. Getting to travel the world with my family and friends, stress free because of my writing. That to me is the very achievable goal that I'm working towards. And then as part of that, I challenge folks when you're defining your success, you need to lay out steps along the way, because doing this full time is kind of a big thing. How do you get there? And so there's a million steps along the way, and you should pick some of those and make them like sub goals. And when you achieve them, celebrate them. Like me, I had a goal of get at least 100 reviews on one of my books. And when I did that, I ticked that box and I celebrated it. I did a blog post like, "Hey guys, I've hit the success marker of mine." So I tell folks define success for yourself, define the steps along the way, and give yourself permission to celebrate every step you achieve to kind of motivate, to keep you motivated moving forward.
Well, and I think that's a very good idea to say, like, break the large goal into smaller goals because then it seems easily attainable. Because I think a lot of people are out there like, okay, I want to be an award winning author. And you're like, what does that mean? Like,
Yeah.
what award? Where? For what?
Yeah. I know, I know some folks that they've got tons of awards because there are just tons of contests that you can enter. And they did the research, found these different contests. And that's not something that's important to me. So that's not on my success marker. But for someone, there are folks that it is. So they would put that on there, but then it gives them, okay, well, if this is what I want, I need to start moving in that direction. For me, I view that my overall strategy is I'm trying to hit a tipping point. I will eventually get to a point where enough people have read and enjoyed my books and are talking about them word of mouth that my books will become somewhat sustaining. They will start to sell exponentially. And so my goals are more along that lines. So it's like, hey, I have a goal. I had a goal of to do 6 panels at DragonCon, and I hit that last year. And because that gets me in front of a lot of people, and it's a great way to make connections. And the best way to make like those really hardcore fans is actually getting some FaceTime with people. It's goals like sell X number of books, get X number of reviews, get my social medias to get 1,000 followers on my Facebook page, get 1,000 followers on my Instagram, things like that. These are all steps I know that if I take them and I hit them, gets me that much closer to reaching that tipping point. Hopefully, there's always an element of luck in everything, but if I do everything I can control, then if the luck comes, I'm ready for it.
Well, and it seems like there could be some of these out there that are perhaps a little bit predatory, where it's like, well, I want to win an award. And it's like, well, you could apply to any number of award ceremonies. And maybe it's like a cool check mark on the resume where you're like, I'm an award winning author. And we're like, what award? And you're like, the Belazies. And we're like, what is a Belazie? And they're
Yeah,
like, I don't know, but I applied to it and I won. And you're like, okay,
yeah,
well, you can say award winning. It just, what is it doing?
exactly. And the general advice I've heard from authors is no one really cares. Unless it's like you won a Pulitzer, no one cares that you're an award-winning author. If your book concept hasn't hooked them, saying award-winning is not going to. But you talk about predatory, there are many thousands of predatory companies out there preying on authors or would-be authors because writing a book is hard and a lot of folks are looking for the basically an easy button. And there are a lot of companies that know that. And so they're very predatory. I was talking to someone that they were like, I just don't know what self-publishing company I should go with. And I was like, what do you mean self-publishing company? There's no such thing as a self-publishing, like you self-publish or you are published. Like there's not a self-publishing company. Those don't really exist. What it is, they're vanity presses. Vanity presses have basically changed their name to be more palatable, but they're very predatory and they take advantage of authors who haven't done their research, who don't have a circle of friends telling them, no, don't do that. And there's just an endless number of these. A lot of these awards are that. The award is absolutely meaningless. You pay all these contests have a fee. They'll have a reading fee. So these people just set up contests to take money to award a meaningless award that they probably know they're awarding to everyone who enters, you know? They're just taking advantage of authors because a lot of times humanity is real awful.
Well, and especially in this, like writing is a passion. You said like this is the dream. People want, if you're writing, like you want it to be out there, like, look at this thing I created. And when you're that passionate about something, it's kind of easy to develop blind sides or, spots where you're like, your critical thinking kind of wavers because you're like, oh, well, they
Yeah.
said they could get me in front of 10,000 people.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, they up to 10,000. They meant one.
Yeah. And, and I've gotten phone calls from people that they just make you feel like $1 million. It's like, oh yeah, we saw your book. Like we think this has a lot of potential. Like we have this podcast. We get it out to, hundreds of thousands of listeners. You just pay us $200 and we'll have you on. And if you don't know any better, you're just like, oh my God, these people actually heard about me. They checked me out. They think oh wow. It's very flattering. They know what they're about. They really sell you on how awesome you are. And it stokes the ego. And you're like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I should totally do this. What I tell authors is if someone is reaching out to you with a business opportunity, they're a scam. Because like ask yourself, who the hell are you? At the point where people would legitimately be reaching out to you with business opportunities, you probably have some sort of management in place to assist with that. Like I have made business deals around books and whatnot, but it was all typically in person at conventions, someone I was talking to that I could get references like, oh hey, do you know such and such? Conventions, authors, we gossip all the time. That's all we do. We sit behind our tables and we gossip about who do we not want to work with, basically. And the reason why the author community, like at these conventions, is so great is because it pretty quickly if there's a bad apple, they get weeded out quick because the author community kind of figures it out very rapidly, and we won't work with those people anymore. So you can feel pretty safe talking to an author at a convention.
Good. I just like, we got this far and I realized we haven't talked about the books you actually write yet.
Oh,
I would love to give a taste of that to the audience if you'll tell them kind of what these books are because I think it's fantastic.
yeah. So my primary series, the world, the overarching book, family is called the Jubal County Saga. But my main series is called The Redemption of Howard Marsh, and it's about a redneck wizard with a crippling meth addiction. So he's where the series starts, he's homeless. He lives in a storage shed behind the Dairy Queen. He really just wants to be left alone. He makes his living stealing the copper out of air conditioning units, as you do. And he just wants to be, just leave him alone, let him stay in his shed and do some drugs and get real drunk. And unfortunately for him, he has some limited magical ability and he keeps getting drug into these like backwoods occult mysteries that only he can solve poorly because he's not good at magic or good at life. Uh, and shenanigans ensue.
Certainly, I know as soon as I read the blurb, I was like, well, this is going to be fantastic. Like this redneck wizard. And I'm like, all right, you got me. Like,
Yeah,
not even my traditional genre, but like it made me smile. And now I'm like, now I'm in.
yeah, yeah. That's when I at conventions, my quick pitch to anyone come up to the table is like, hey, I write a series about a redneck wizard with a crippling meth addiction. And 60% of people are like, oh, okay, whatever. And then like 20% are like, ew, and like back away slowly. But 20% of people are like, oh my God, tell me more. What on earth? And those are my people. And to like that to me is the real perk of like self-publishing is no one, no traditional publisher would publish these books. If I sell 100,000 copies of them, then yeah, Orbit will come knocking on my door and say, "Oh, hey, what if we put these out?" But there's no way I was going to get an agent with these books who would get me on the shelf through Tor. That wasn't going to happen. But because there's not enough broad appeal. But with self-publishing, you're not necessarily always looking for broad appeal. A lot of times going niche is really the move. And so there's not a lot of folks writing redneck wizards. And I don't know of anyone that are writing redneck meth addicted wizards. So it's kind of a narrow field, but if that's what you're into, you got to buy it from me. So
Yeah, it's definitely one of those where, like, if I saw a banner that said redneck wizard, I'd be like, well, I'm going to look.
yeah,
Like, I'm going to find
yeah.
out because the 2 words you've got me. So let's go find out what's happening over here.
Oh yeah, I give away stickers. If you come by my booth, I have stickers that say "Read Redneck Meth Wizard Books," just on a little 2x2 sticker. And I tell everyone the rule is anyone can have one sticker, but if you take a second sticker, you have to put it someplace that someone would not approve. Uh, and a lot of folks like, oh my God, yes, I'm going to stick this at work. Or one guy at Dragon Con was like, oh, brother, I work for a pest company. I got you. He just grabbed like a handful of stickers. So I like to think there's a bunch of like air ducts and homes in Atlanta that have my stickers in them. So, but yeah, so for those who, there's some folks who like, this is the book series I've been waiting on, because you write the books you want to read, especially if it's a book that no one else is writing, because then you're in a niche of one.
Well, and I mean, it's one of those that I think, for every person that you see, like, ugh, get that reaction, there's probably several people like me who, I'll probably, well, I might see you at a convention, who knows? But, like, you'll never get to see my face go like, as I like read Redneck Wizard. Like,
Yeah.
so it's like, there's this secret influence that is pushing behind the scenes, and you're like, you don't get to see it. And I think that's good, I guess, that it's happening, but hard because, like, you'd want to know.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's so part of it is so the folks who go ooh at my line, they would not have liked my books anyway. Even if I didn't have, anything meth addiction in there, they probably just wouldn't like my books. There's lots of cursing. It's a very realistic view of the Deep South. It does not gloss over issues of racism and poverty, things like that. It's very, very true to life in the Deep South. And so, the kind of folks that are just offended at the thought of reading a protagonist like that, they wouldn't like my books. And this is the best thing. I want them to say ooh and walk away because I don't want them to buy my book under false pretenses and then leave me a terrible review. But also, like it can be a hard sell. So when I my marketing, so his familiar is a possum. And so every convention, I wear Hawaiian shirts with possums on them. I have a plush possum on my table, stuff like that. And I have so many people that come up to my booth and talk to me about possums. I just did Fanboy Knoxville. I had 2 different people go through their phone and show me all the pictures and videos of their pet possum, and it was amazing. But so I'm able to get people to the table, like talking about possums, and they're like, "Oh my God, I love possum!" And I can tell them, "Yeah, I write a series about a redneck wizard, and his familiar is a possum." And I get a surprising number of sales that way. But they're like, "Oh my God, okay, yeah, no, I got to do that." And they might not would have come over without seeing the possum. It kind of softens the branding around meth. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I could see that. And these are where 2 very different worlds collide, is I think, like, the way that you have to write a novel, especially a novel series, like, you have a very concrete world with, socioeconomic problems and all these things, versus, like, the other thing you do in game design generally has a pretty loose world or is very
yeah,
flexible.
yeah. Yeah, it is. it is two very different kind of mindsets in a lot of ways, like it in structure. But I will say that I do kind of steer into the idea of niche there as well. A lot of the games I make are very quirky, very odd, very niche games because I want to get noticed, and if I've made another game where you just go adventuring in a dungeon, I'm one of hundreds. But when I made a game where you are three octopuses in a trench coat trying to escape from an aquarium, that stands out a little bit more. Uh, so, and it's fun. It's fun. It's quirky. I like to think I'm fun and quirky. I try and make fun and quirky games. I try and make fun and quirky books. But at the same time, it's not all laughter. I do so like even with, Redneck Wizard is in funny at face value. There is a very real. I don't glorify the drug usage at all. I do show that it has absolutely destroyed his life, and the point of the series is called The Redemption of Howard Marsh because by the time the series ends, he will have kicked his drug addiction and kind of fixed his life. But he's got a long way to get there. And then even in my game design, I do have, quirky, silly games like, where you play as an octopus in a trench coat. But then my most popular game right now is called There's a Witch at the Edge of the Woods, where you play as a group of Puritans during the time of the Salem witch trials, traveling from Boston to Dover. It's a 6-day journey. You're all strangers, and one of you may be a witch, and it's kind of got this mechanic on establishing who you think the witch is. It's a little bit like Werewolf, if you're familiar with the social deduction game, Werewolf or Mafia, things like that, in a more RPG structure. And that's a fairly serious game. It's not played for laughs at all, and it's definitely designed for people to kind of examine paranoia and whatnot in that time, and social dynamics. So, yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know.
I mean, anyone who has not played Werewolf or Mafia, they are both the kind of game that by about minute 5, people are yelling at each other. Because you're like, you don't understand. I don't know why you don't believe me. And like there is some full on like social breakdowns that happen that I think are super funny to
Oh
watch
yeah.
because there is like inevitably one of your friends, if you're at a table of all friends, is lying to you. And
Yeah.
you're like, how well do I know my friends? And can I spot them lying to me and the entire group?
Yeah. Oh, they're so good. I love I don't get to play them as much as I would like because you really need like I for Werewolf, I feel like you need to really have at least like 10 people to play for it to be like really fun. And my gaming group is normally more in like the 5-person range. So, but every so often we do throw a party and we break out Werewolf and it's just always just a ton of fun. So, I decided, what if I stripped all the like lighthearted fun out of that and, and made it into a grim, supernatural, gothic RPG?
Yeah, certainly. Well, I mean, I think that's what makes these fun. Like, if you're looking for a game that panders to the things that you really love, like it exists out there somewhere. I
Yeah.
recently saw one called Sentai and Sensibility, which is a mixture of the Kamen Rider Power Rangers series mixed with
Okay.
Pride and Prejudice.
I love it. I love it.
And I'm like, you've got my attention again because it's like on its face, it's hysterical somewhat. So
Yeah.
like I'm intrigued, but like if you're a huge fan of, Pride and Prejudice and Jane Austen's social commentary and also mechanized robots, like you're gonna love the game. So that's so niche, but
Yeah.
also it sold because I saw it and I am not
Yeah.
like an avid player.
Oh yeah. Oh, I did this isn't a game, it's a lore book, but it's a lore book designed for games like Mork Borg and Troika that mixes SEC football and Lovecraftian horror, and reimagines all the different fandoms as cults because I love SEC football and I love Lovecraftian horror. And I realized that Venn diagram, the overlap is like 4 people, and I'm one of those 4 people. But I made a whole lore book to sell to the other three people. And, when those three people find it, they're going to buy it in a heartbeat. So,
Yeah, you're like, I'm gonna have some immediate fans. I can't wait.
yeah, yeah. And that's a lot of the games I do. That's what happens is they're very, very niche. But when the right person comes along, it's like, oh my God, I've got to have this. At that point, it just sells itself. All I have to do is like, oh, here's the blurb, and like, oh, well, just here's my money. Let's go. And so that's how I want to sell. I don't want to have to keep selling stuff. I just want, hey, redneck wizard, and just folks come hand me money. That's the dream.
Yeah, of course. Well, and I mean, I think that reinforces the passion when you hear somebody say, like, I'm in. Like, I don't
Yeah,
need any further explanation. Sell me the thing. Like, shut up and take my money. That's you're like, man, this is the dream right now. Like, this
yeah.
moment is the dream.
Yeah, no, it. You're right. It really does. It writing is a very lonely job, and I'm very transparent with this. I've struggled with depression all my adult life, so there are long periods there where I just like, what am I even doing? Like what am I just wasting my time? And then getting to events like that and having those moments where, because like I said earlier, a lot of times we will share a booth, and so at Fanboy Knoxville, we had four authors in a booth: Richard Fierce, Alfred Muller, Ben Meeks, and myself. And someone would come up, and we would each pitch. And so Alfred would be like, I write about angels and demons, and I have a traditional fantasy series. And then Richard was like, I have a bunch of Dragon Rider stuff. And then Ben was like, I write about a were otter in North Georgia hunting demons, and I have a lit RPG, sci-fi lit RPG series. And then I would say, and I write about a redneck wizard with a meth addiction. And some people would hear Dragon Rider and they didn't want to hear anything else. That was it. They wanted Richard's books done. Some folks were like, "Oh, you have a lit RPG? I'm sold, Ben." But then some folks is like they hear Redneck Wizard and they just like, "Oh, you know what? To hell with everyone else. I want. That's what I want." And so when you have those moments, it kind of is like, okay, I'm not wasting my time. I just need to find a convention of redneck wizards. That's what I need to be doing.
There's another Venn diagram for you, somewhere
Yeah.
between Dragon Con and, oh God, some horrible Southern tradition, I'm sure.
Yeah. Oh yeah, like the something between the Iron Bowl and Dragon Con. There's an event there somewhere, and I'll hit that and just make a killing.
Yeah,
But
make
until
money.
then, I take it where I can get it.
Well, and when you're dealing with, like, imposter syndrome and some depression, and you're like, you're still putting books out, do you ever have that fear where you're like, are people going to like book three as much as they like two? Is there like a high pressure to just keep upping your game?
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, the bigger worry is I'm actually about to start putting out it's going to be a horror trilogy. It's the same world, same universe. It's all part of the Jubal County saga, but this is going to be a horror trilogy about a game warden druid in Tuscaloosa who gets involved in like eldritch cryptid shenanigans. And so, yeah, it's, folks who love Howard Marsh, they may get to these and be like, I hate these, I want more Howard Marsh. What are you doing? Why are you not putting out more Howard Marsh books? I don't want to read about Grant Richmond. I want to read about Howard Marsh. So that's absolutely a real worry. And yeah, I worry that I'm worried about pulling a Kevin Hearn, who, for those who don't know, he wrote the Iron Druid series. And it's like 10 book series that everyone fanatically loves books 1 through 9. And pretty much everyone I've heard talk about it hates book 10. It's like wrote 9 amazing books and then didn't stick the landing. That's a real worry. Like I worry that like I write all these books and then the last one is terrible and I tarnish my legacy or, I mean, Kevin Hearn's just doing just fine. Don't worry. But it is absolutely a worry. I see where some people leave reviews like, oh, book 4 is my favorite book, or book 5 is my favorite book, or 6. But it's like, okay, well, why was book 4 like better than books 5 and 6? Like, what was it the craft, or did you just like the stories? Like, and most of the time they don't say that. They're like, oh, this is my favorite book. But why though?
Yeah.
And I'm left to wonder. And so yeah, it's absolutely a fear. I mean, Stephen King makes more money than God, and he's got some absolute stinker books out there. It's a fear, but it's one of those I just got to keep plugging away at it.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think there's something in that I think doesn't hit translation, right? Because if I was writing a book series like yourself and I'm like, okay, book 6 is out, let's do this. And people say like, well, I really loved 4 more. I'd be like, wait, what happened? Why is
Yeah.
4 is 6 bad? And they're like, well, 6 isn't bad. It's just like 4 is good. And you're like, but that means 6 isn't as good, right?
Yeah.
And so you'd be like, well, because I've heard a lot of authors say like, well, the best thing I've ever written is the next thing I'm going to write, because they're like, I'm always looking forward to my next project. Otherwise, why would I do it?
Yeah.
And I'm like, that really conflicts with like, yeah, but people love this other series.
Yeah. Well, and one thing I've got going on, my last book that came out is a collection of short stories, novellas set in the world of Jubal County, but all new characters. And I genuinely think it is far and away my best book. That said, it is also my most polarizing book. There are some folks that just bounce off it hard, and then I've proportionally speaking, I know how many people have read this book. The amount of people proportionally who have read this book who've reached out to me to be like, "Holy crap, dude, this like I love this so much," is pretty high, relatively speaking. And I really do legitimately think it's my best work. But I call it my impossible to market book because it's kind of sort of urban fantasy. It's got some, but it's not super urban fantasy. It's got some horror tropes to it, like vampires and ghosts, but it's not horror. And it's got a lot of romance to it, but romance readers like happy endings. And the whole point of this anthology is the unifying theme is romance that fails due to supernatural meddling. So I call it a breakup playlist in book form. And so I can't market it to romance, I can't market it to horror. I can kind of market it to urban fantasy, but it's this weird little Southern Gothic collection. But it's my best stuff. So, but yeah, I've had a guy who left 5-star reviews on all 6 books in the Redemption of Howard Marsh and just raved about them. And then he read that one and left it a 3-star. I was like, yeah, no, just kind of bounced off this one. But then I've had other folks is like, oh my God, I have not read a book in a single sitting in years, and this was it. So, win some, lose some.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I have hit that point. I will let you know just to boost your ego a little here. I've already had multiple moments where I'm like, just take my money. Where you're like, yeah, it's going to be the Druid game warden, and I'm like, you know what, I'm in. Like, just send me the pre-order link after
Yeah.
the show, and we'll get it worked
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, it's book 1 is done. It'll be going to the editor next month. And then books 2 and 3 are both half written. The last time when we were talking about NaNoWriMo, my very last NaNoWriMo that I did, I wrote 50,000 words of this horror novel. And then when I was done, I realized, oh, this really needs to be a trilogy. And the book I wrote, the first half of it became book 1. The second half of it is becoming book 3. So I finished up book 1. I'm 45,000 words into book 2. And so if I, you know, what's the phrase? God willing and the creeks don't rise. I'll be done writing books 2 and 3 this year, and they'll probably all 3 come out next year. So
Awesome. Well, Bob, this has been
fingers
super
crossed.
fun, and I want to make sure people can find you if they're looking for more from you. So let people know where they can find these books.
Yeah, the easiest thing to remember, because you're not going to know how to spell my last name. Don't even try. Tales by Bob. It's my website, it's my social medias. If you just search Tales by Bob, I will come up and you will find links to all my books and everything. They're on Amazon. You can search Jubal County Saga on Amazon if you want to skip all the other stuff I do and just get to the books. But yeah, Tales by Bob, that's how you can find me. And I have a contact form on my website. Seriously, if you're an author, aspiring author, any point along the journey, please reach out. I will happily answer any questions. And please take advantage of my transparency project and my education resources. They're all free. Anytime I teach a workshop, I turn that workshop into a YouTube video for free, just trying to pass them, paying it forward. So get at me.
Bob, fantastic. I will put links to that in the description, so people should be able to find it incredibly easy, even if, you have the spelling ability of a goldfish like myself. So
Same.
it should be right there. Again, thank you so much for being on here. I've appreciated your time immensely.
Oh, thank you. This has been a ton of fun. So glad we got to link up.
There's something about a redneck wizard that will make me laugh every time. And I think it's partially the mental image of Harry Potter with a shotgun and how exactly the magic makes things disappear. In other news, August is chugging along and the rankings have updated just a little bit. Number 1, the United States, still led by New York, California, and Illinois. Number 2, England of the United Kingdom. Number 3, Canada, still barely led by Ontario, with British Columbia just behind. Number 4, Australia, with New South Wales now leading Victoria by 2 listeners. And number 5, Ghana, once again overtaking New Zealand. That's it for this week. Have a great week, a great weekend, and I'll see you all back here next week for another new episode. Until that next episode, pretty please do all those things that help the show grow, like rating, reviewing, liking, and subscribing. Remember, you can reach out to dumbenoughpodcast@gmail.com or on any of the social medias if you want to reach me personally. But most importantly, stay dumb.